chat with me today, and I'm super excited to listen to your story. I have had sons that have been in prison and long term prison sentences. So I've heard lots of horror stories, and it's really hard as a mom. I know there were lots of things that they never have told me that happened, but I've heard a lot after the fact. They didn't tell me while it was going on, but told me after the fact. So it's extremely hard. But then in your case, with being affected with autism and your personal beliefs and lifestyle, that makes it even harder. So I don't know what you want to share with us today, but I am really excited to listen and see what you have done with that experience.
My name is Matt Melvin. I wrote a book called Bullied Behind Bars, A Gay Christian Trump Supporter Goes to Prison. My book outlines my story from growing up in childhood, being born in Tyngsboro, Massachusetts, having a best friend that lived right behind me, and the school bully that lived next to me.
Oh, wow.
It was an interesting paradigm, right?
Yeah, that's rough. And I'm sure if you were in mainstream classes that you had more than one bully through school, I'm sure.
I did. I had multiple bullies.
Yeah, that's rough. I know I was not ever in school settings, but I was a caregiver. So it's very much a real thing, especially when they change. Like when I was in school, they had separate classes. And then when they decided to mainstream everybody, which I believe is better if there is good supervision and good teachers, but not all the teachers pay attention or don't have time to pay attention to what's actually going on.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. Well, I think it's important to mainstream everybody. It's also important to have those folks that are unique be in classes together.
Yes.
That way they can form friendships, which the neurotypical people would not understand what they're going through. It's no different than it is right now. I have friends that are neurotypical and do not understand me, how I come to the world. Stephen Covey wrote a book called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of those topics was seek first to understand, then to be understood. We need to understand the other person then before we try to make them understand us.
Yes, absolutely. And I know I have 10 children, so I have a couple that had learning disabilities and none that had an autism diagnosis, but ADHD and one of my sons is dyslexic. So we dealt with that in the schools. But I also homeschooled for 8 years. And that made a huge difference because I didn't have to worry about being in that social setting. We had socialization, but it was not in a segregated age group. It was more rounded than that. So I'm interested more in what did you learn from your time in prison and what are you doing now? Do you advocate for prison conditions or is it specific to people that are neurospicy in prison? Because
I advocate for reform in the judicial system the current system is a train wreck.
Yes.
Louisiana houses more inmates than any other state, yet they have not seen a decrease in the recidivism rate. There's still a plethora of crime going on in Louisiana. So we know by statistics that locking people up, giving them 3 hots and a cot is not the solution.
Absolutely.
I'm going to be quite frank. The system is never going to change. There's so much money that's being made from police officers, judges, lawyers. They're all incentivized to get convictions. And when they get convictions, that's how they move up within the sick cults that they're in.
Yes. Absolutely. And yes, the judicial system and the prison systems. I have only dealt with Indiana DOC and just slightly with Tennessee, and even just those two, just state by state, is very different.
Correct. Yes.
But we go through cycles of let's rehabilitate, and we do that for a few years, and then we swing back to, oh, let's just punish and not have anything in there to help people better themselves and rehab themselves. And so we go through these vicious cycles. And you're right, it's probably never going to change. There hasn't been a disruption in our judicial system in my lifetime.
The current superintendent for prisons in Vermont is very against Bible study, very against religion, very against inmates becoming better people. As a result, there's very limited resources, very few volunteers that are actually able to come in. As a result, inmates have a lot of time on their hand, which causes fights, arguments. It's no different than on the outside.
Yes.
When people have time on their hands, oftentimes they engage in illegal or reckless behavior.
Absolutely. Yeah. When there's boredom and nothing to do, and you can't leave, especially, you can't remove yourself. So, they find things to do. And it's crazy. I know from hearing from my boys, my son witnessed somebody being stomped to death. And that's just crazy to me. I mean, I can't imagine the trauma that just as a witness of it, and to have that kind of abuse on an ongoing, constant basis.
I witnessed an individual walk up to the second story, second story tier, which I was housed. I was in solitary confinement at this point. Watch the guy climb up the metal bars and swan dive.
Wow.
I watched the news media come. I watched high-level people in the prison system show up to the unit that I have never in my life seen. And it was all a cover-up. They all covered it up. They pretended that something else happened. They wouldn't tell the real story. So part of my book includes that.
Right. Yeah. And I can definitely see that, because you would not get the real stories. In fact, when my oldest son died, he had just gotten out of prison a few months prior. He had been in for 15 years. And my son that's 2 years younger than him, he told me, he said, I'm kind of glad that it happened now, because he was on his way back. He was doing things that were going to get him revoked, and he would have died in prison, and we would never know how he died, because they would never tell us the real story. And my son had been in, so he knew. that was true. He said, at least we know what happened and we get to handle it as a family here rather than whatever cover story they would have told us had he gone back.
While I was writing at that same facility, my journal entries were confiscated.
Wow.
There's no such thing as coincidences. These guards knew I was writing what was happening. I went from one facility to another, and I was journaling my experience, and that is taboo in the system. You don't ever write about guards, inmates, anything. But I wanted to share my story to let the outside world know what goes on behind bars. Because until you've experienced it, you don't know what's going on.
Right. And even like they do the shows, you know, Locked Up and In for 30 Days or whatever. I don't know what they're called. I don't believe that those portray a real story. Those are all
they're
for
all
show.
Manufactured for the TV cameras.
Right. So without people that are willing to come out and write about it or speak about it, nobody knows if you haven't been there. I mean, honestly, we can't say we know anything if we haven't personally experienced it in life.
Yes, exactly.
How has your book been received? That's my question.
Good question. I would say mixed reviews. There are people out there that believe that you can't be gay and Christian. That is not true. There are people that believe that I should have remained quiet and not said anything. However, I am a bold, courageous, fearless individual who refuses to back down. There was a time in my life that I had bullies. Today, I stand up to bullies.
Right.
And there were a lot of people that felt that I should remove people's names and not hold people accountable for their actions. I was held accountable for my actions when I chose to break the law. We each have to be accountable for our own actions.
Absolutely. And my belief is we all come here and choose lessons and we choose soul contracts before we come into this human experience. So I believe that we all have that purpose and we go through these experiences in order to learn those lessons and then be able to speak about them and teach about them. You know, I lost 2 boys in 8 months and that changed me. I am not the same person I was 2 years ago. And I'm able to speak out. And I so far have not had a lot of controversy or pushback, but I speak about grief very differently than what you hear from most people. But most people don't talk about grief. Nobody teaches us about grief. And you've gone through that because the way you have lived your life with having that kind of trauma, you have gone through all kinds of different levels and different types of grief. But nobody ever teaches us how to process that.
Exactly.
And that's what this podcast is all about, is to open it up. I mean, I don't care what the topic is about. I don't care what the experience was. It's these conversations that nobody wants to have to bring to light, because once we start shining light on them, then changes can be made.
Each person processes grief differently.
Yes.
I encourage each person to find different outlets and see what works. For me, therapy is a complete and utter waste of time. As a Christian, I don't believe in asking heathen individuals for advice.
Yes. Now, I believe for some people, like you said, everybody processes individually, and every different type of grief, like losing my boys so close together, the experience was completely different. And then I also, as I leaned into that portal of grief and walked through that processing, I also learned to process all the grief in my life prior that I never knew was even grief. And when you love addicts, you go through years and years of grief, whether you ever lose them to death or not. You still grieve all kinds of different things about them. And so I realized I had been doing that for 20 years with my kids, before they were even dead. And then I had to process all of that also. But
one thing I learned, I myself am not an addict, but one thing I learned from listening to an addict is they will always say, I just need this fixed one more time.
yes.
And that's how we as human beings say something. I just want to engage in reckless sin one more time.
Yeah. Or just once, period. I'm only going to do this once. But what kind of circumstances are you going to cause, and what kind of consequences are you going to have from that one time? I mean, that's how you set it up.
You could choose the sin, but you can't choose the consequence.
Yes. Absolutely.
So if 10 people sin, the consequence for all 10 people will be very different.
Yes.
And it has nothing to do with skin color. It has nothing to do with age.
Yeah.
Just different circumstances for different people.
Right. Well, and like I said, I believe that we chose those circumstances to learn lessons. So it depends on each individual, what I'm here to learn. And what that person may be here to learn. And we do the same thing, but our consequences are completely different according to that, even.
What I've learned is that my shadow of Asperger's, being on the autism spectrum, is impulsivity. That impulsivity will always be there. Despite any medication that is given, there's always side effects.
Yes.
I choose to not take medication and choose to live in authenticity. And I've now have tools, which I didn't have when I broke the law, to use my impulsivity for the better rather than for evil.
Right.
We all choose to use our skills for the good or the bad.
Absolutely. And we choose whether we're open to learn those tools and new skills to better ourselves.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure, how old were you when this event happened with the car?
Which one? The first or the second time? The first was I was 23.
So you were still very young, and frontal lobe is not even completely developed, plus the impulsivity of Asperger's. So
plus I would also add unresolved anger, hatred, animosity,
unprocessed traumas.
Absolutely. That through generational family curses, we were always taught to stuff, suck it up, buttercup, men don't show emotions, all those ridiculous notions that society tries to teach men.
Yeah.
In reality, a true man is able to show emotion. A man is able to cry and does not try to look for validation from the outside world.
Absolutely.
What other people think of me is none of my business.
Right. And those are lessons for all of us. not just men, but yes, men that being that strong masculine, I can't be emotional or show my emotions has been so toxic because then you're not processing the traumas as they come. You're just stuffing them down. And that's even before I lost my boys, I was on my soapbox about self-love all the time because that is the foundation for all growth and expansion, is to learn to love ourselves more.
Absolutely.
And so that we can be secure in ourselves and we don't need that external validation, and that's how we can grow and expand.
I can't love another person unless I first love myself.
Yes. I take that back. I don't fully agree with that, but I do understand because I've said that for years and years also. I believe we can love other people, but only to the level that we love ourselves. And as women, I think that we have more compassion and more patience and more love for other people than we do ourselves. Because we are taught to take care of everybody else and put ourselves last. And that's a big program and conditioning for women, especially for moms.
You are taught to be caretakers.
Yes. So that's what I did. I took care. I was a mom very young. I was 17 when my oldest was born. So most of my life, I did everything for everyone else.
And you sacrificed yourself.
Yes. Yes.
You
absolutely.
put yourself last.
Yep.
And
I was in marriages where there was abuse and control and narcissism. So I absolutely put myself last because that was the only thing to keep the peace. I had to do everything else to keep peace in the home.
And how did that serve you? That's one of my favorite questions to ask.
That served me with being stripped of all confidence, all self-worth, allowing my children to be raised in the trauma of domestic violence and poverty. And those traumas, because I didn't know any better, never got processed. And that led to my kids having mental health issues and having addiction issues and even physical issues. And then it passed down into my grandchildren. And when I started seeing those repeated cycles in my grandchildren is when I was like, this has to stop. We have to stop this generational trauma and teach people how to process in the moment. If we can teach parents how to process their own trauma in the moment and they model it to their children, then we raise a whole generation of kids that don't have trauma responses because they know how to process it in the moment and not shove it down and wait to process it years later after it causes issues.
My encouragement for everyone is to find your tribe.
Yes.
Seek out. If you're a man, find a group of men. If you're a woman, find a group of women. Your spouse should not be your only outlet.
Absolutely. And I preach that huge because we are not meant to do this human thing alone. Mm-hmm. We are meant to have support. And that's one of the hardest things for all of us, is to ask for support and to rely on other people. That was one of the things from my own trauma that was very hard for me. I became hyper independent because I couldn't count on anybody else. I learned that I couldn't depend on men. And because I was secluded very much from having friends and even not being around my family often, that I didn't have any support. I didn't have anyone that I could depend on. And so I became super hyper independent, and I taught that to my children.
And again, I'll ask the question, how did that serve them?
Same way, they learn not to process their trauma, and they learn to have issues with relationships and trust. And I have children that are also hyper independent and that don't ask for support. And they're growing, and they're expanding and they're learning. And as they see me modeling that, even as adult children, they still learn from me modeling it. So that's the only thing we can do, is we have to put ourselves first and make sure that we are doing what we need to do to continuously grow and expand and learn better skills and tools. And then we model that to others that we don't even always know. Those ripple effects are tremendous.
That's why it's so important to find a group,
Yes.
Find people that can support you. One thing that I find a lot of men struggle with is listening. They have a short attention span, and I've found in my experience that most people listen with the intention to respond instead of fully listening to what somebody said. And I've learned that through doing group work. We did an exercise where it was a men's weekend. We were all sitting around a circle. One man would share, and then he would pick any man in the group that hadn't been called on before. And it was unbelievable how many men were not listening, or don't pick me, or tell me if you're going to pick me. That's not the whole point of the exercise. The exercise is to be like a Boy Scout. Be prepared. You don't know what's going to happen. Be on the hot seat.
Right.
A lot of men struggle with that. And I even saw men taking notes, which I think is great. I didn't take notes. And the exercise taught me a skill called reflective listening. And I'll model it a little bit. Somebody would share, and then whoever was picked would say, what I hear you saying is fill in the blank. It's not a regurgitation of what that man just shared. It's a summary. And then at the end, you ask them, did I hear that correctly? Or were there points that were incorrect? Because I've seen it all the time where people, men, and when I say people, because a lot of my work is with men, not with women, they fill in the blanks when I didn't say that.
Yeah.
So I encourage each person to not fill in the blanks with what their experience is, but rather ask questions. What I hear you saying is blank. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Because we listen through our own filters. And
we
that's
listen
where
to our own experience. If I've never experienced somebody getting murdered, I'm going to use my filter of how I think that person would feel, when in fact I can't even begin to understand how a mother would feel if his or her child was murdered.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And nonviolent communication is so amazing. I was introduced to that a couple years ago, and it puts us in that place of being the mirror, mirroring it back, and like you said, reflecting it back to them. Is this what you mean? Because we can't effectively communicate if we're not on the same page and we're assuming that we know what they said.
I never assume. I've seen people use that, and I always give them, that makes an ASS out of you and me.
Absolutely.
The better way of doing things is to ask questions. What I hear you saying is blank. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Tell me more. That's a great phrase to use when you're trying to get more out of that person. I've seen it a lot with men. They will share very little, and I will ask questions. That's just who I am. A lot of guys are not that way. They want you to give them all the information.
Right.
However, I'm not one of those people that will just give all of my information without seeing that the person is interested in what I'm saying first.
Right. And understanding what you're saying, because you can bombard them with information, and if they're not understanding from the very beginning, then it's just a waste of time.
Correct. And not everybody's able to handle that. Not everybody is able and has the ability to handle another person's experiences.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
It's not a mistake that I have the experience I have and I'm able to help other people. Until you've been through the battlefield, the war field, you can't help anybody.
Right. Absolutely. And that's why our stories and our experiences are so vital, because that's what we have been there. And that's why now I work with parents that have children affected with mental health issues and addictions, because I had good support. I had amazing, amazing support that I would not be where I'm at right now if I didn't. But I did not have a parent that had been there. And so I can do that for others now. And I can say, yes, your grief and your circumstances and your experience is going to be different, but I have been in my own experiences similar, and I can be empathetic. And I can stand and hold space with you.
And I think that's also a really important question. Are you able to hold space for them?
Yes.
And if they're not, or they pause, it may not be the right person.
Right. Or the right time, because there might be things going on with that person that they're not capable, they don't have the capacity at that time to hold space. And I think that's another effective thing with communication also, especially with couples or close relationships, is when we want to share something, we don't ask our spouse or our significant others or our loved ones. Typically, we don't ask them up front, do you have the capacity to listen right now? And to honor them if they say no. Because if they don't, it's not going to help you. And then there's going to be more problems because you're going to get upset, or you're going to get mad at them, or they're going to get upset. If we learn how to start that conversation with, are you able to hold this? If not, can we do this later?
Absolutely, no question. I think it's important to ask the questions up front. That way I don't get disappointed if I don't hear the answers I want to hear.
Right.
Because if I just data dump, it's not going to serve either one of us.
Yeah. And it's overwhelming for both of you. Absolutely. So is there anything else specific that you share or you want to share today? It doesn't have to be something you normally do.
My book is available on Amazon, Bullied Behind Bars, a Christian Trump supporter goes to prison. Pick it up. Email me, bulliedbehindbars@gmail.com. Let me know what you think. Happy to talk to anyone. If you don't have anybody in your life that you feel can help you, I'm certainly able and willing to help anyone. I'm on social media, Bullied Behind Bars on Instagram, Bars Bullied on X, Matthew.Melvin.5621 on Facebook. Reach out to me. Let me know what's going on. If you have a speaking engagement, you want somebody to come and talk to a group of at-risk teens that are engaging in small level crimes. That's how my story started. It didn't just start with stealing a car. It started with driving off without paying for gas, walking out of a restaurant without paying. All of those actions I didn't have consequences, so it was accelerated.
Right. Absolutely. And that's very interesting because we don't realize, we just think, oh, that's a bad person or they made a really bad choice. But those small decisions that didn't have big consequences, and you continue to escalate. And
right.
We do that in all areas of life.
Absolutely, no question. If there were consequences to the small crimes, we may not be talking today.
Right. And I saw that same things in my family too. There weren't consequences. And so my boys continued to use drugs and do illegal things because they got away with it.
No guts, no glory.
Right? I agree. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. This has been awesome, totally different than what I'm used to. And I love that because it grows me and it gets that out there and allows the ripple effects. All of your links will be in the show notes and on the live streams so that people can get in touch with you. If you can't find him, reach out to me and I will introduce you. I actually want to read your book for sure, so I will go get that. And I'm excited. I've only had a couple men. I did 19 episodes in 25, and I've only had 2 men on my show. So I have you and another one this week, and it's awesome to have more men coming forward and speaking out and sharing their stories. And so thank you so much for being willing to be vulnerable, because that's not easy for any of us, but very hard for men.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
You're welcome.